Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me where you're from and what time you're watching now. Get comfortable and relax. Asterisk, the lighthouse keeper's secret. The lighthouse at Blackwood Point was a silent, lonely giant. For 30 years, Elias Thorne had been its keeper, a job he'd inherited from his father. The sea was his only neighbor, and the gulls were his only friends. The beam from the old Fresnel lens swept across the churning Atlantic. A steady heartbeat against the wild coast. Elias was a man of routine. He woke with the dawn, polished the brass fittings until they gleamed, and checked the intricate clockwork, a mechanism that rotated the light. He ate his meals alone, listening to the wind and the waves. The solitude didn't bother him. He preferred the quiet language of the lighthouse to the complicated noise of people. One foggy Tuesday, a storm rolled in from the west, a furious mess of wind and rain. The sea turned to bruised purple, and the waves crashed against the base of the lighthouse with a sound like thunder. The power went out, a common occurrence during such storms. Elias lit the old oil lamp in the lantern room, the way his father had taught him. The flickering flame cast long dancing shadows on the walls, and the wind howled outside like a living thing. As he was winding the clockwork, a small, dark object caught his eye. It was wedged between two of the giant gears, a small wooden box, about the size of his palm. He had worked on this machine for decades and had never seen it before. He carefully pried the box out. It was made of old, dark wood, polished smooth by time. On top, a compass was carved, and at its center, a single, faded star. Elias tried to open it, but there was no lock, no latch. He shook it, but it made no sound. Puzzled, he put the box in his pocket and went back to work. The storm raged for 2 more days. The phone lines were down, the ferry was stopped, and Elias was completely alone. He spent his time thinking about the strange box. He tried pressing on the carved star, twisting the compass, but nothing worked. It seemed to be a puzzle with no solution. On the third night, as the storm finally began to fade, a new sound came. It wasn't the wind or the waves. It was a soft, rhythmic clicking, like a tiny clock. Elias realized the sound was coming from the box in his pocket. He took it out and looked at it. The compass on top was slowly spinning, pointing not north, but straight down, towards the floor. Elias's heart beat a little faster. He looked at the floor of the lantern room, and then he noticed something he'd never seen before. A faint, almost invisible crack ran along the polished wooden floorboards, forming the shape of a star. It was the same design as the one on the box. He knelt down and pressed the box against the center of the star-shaped crack. With a quiet click, a section of the floorboards gave way, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, there was a single rolled-up piece of paper. Elias unrolled the paper. It was a map, hand-drawn and faded with age. It showed the entire coastline around Blackwood Point, with a lighthouse at its center. But there were also other strange markings, a series of crosses along the shore, a single X on a small, secluded beach, and a cryptic note written in his father's familiar, looping handwriting. The sea takes, but it also gives. The truth is, to found where the light ends. Elias stared at the map. His father had been the keeper here for 40 years before him, and he had never mentioned a hidden map or a secret. His father had always said the sea was a harsh master, full of dangers, but never that it gave anything back. The next day, with the sun finally shining, Elias made a decision. He would follow the map. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was a final message from his father. He packed a bag, left a note for the supply boat, and set off on foot, the small compass box in his pocket. He followed the winding trails along the cliffs, using the marks on the map to guide him. The crosses led him to hidden coves and ancient tide pools. He walked for hours, until the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery colors. He found the small, secluded beach marked with the X. It was a tiny cove, surrounded by jagged rocks, and it was completely empty. He searched the sand, the rocks, but found nothing. He was about to give up when he remembered his father's words. The truth is found where the light ends. He looked back at the lighthouse, a distant, beautiful beacon against the fading sky. Its light hadn't turned on yet. He looked at the map, again, and his eyes fell on a small symbol near the X that he had missed before. It wasn't a mark on the land. It was a mark on the sea, pointing to a single rock formation just beyond the waves. Elias waited until the lighthouse beam began. Its first sweep of the evening, the powerful beam of light cut through the gloom and settled on the rock formation for a brief moment. He saw something, a glint of metal reflecting in the fading light. He swam out to the rock. The freezing water a shock to his system there. Half hidden by seaweed and barnacles, was a rusted metal box. It was heavy and difficult to open. Inside, covered in a thin layer of protective wax, was a thick leather journal. Elias hurried back to the beach and opened the journal. On the first page, in his father's handwriting, were the words, "My son, if you are reading this, you have solved my last puzzle. What you hold is the real history of Blackwood Point." He read on, and the journal told a story of his father's life as a rescue diver, a job he had kept secret. His father had a gift for finding things lost at sea. He had found treasure, messages in bottles, and even lost people. He had used the lighthouse's unique position to guide his searches. The journal was a detailed record of every dive, every discovery, and every life he had saved in secret, far from the eyes of the world. He read about a young woman saved from a shipwreck, an old man rescued from a fishing boat, and a box of jewels from a sunken ship he had donated anonymously. His father hadn't been just a keeper of the light. He had been a secret guardian of the coast, a silent hero. Elias sat on the beach, the journal in his hands, watching the lighthouse beams sweep over the dark water. The sea still felt vast and dangerous, but now it also felt like a partner, a keeper of secrets. He had lived his whole life in the shadow of the light, but only now did he truly understand its power. He returned to the lighthouse a changed man. The isolation no longer felt lonely, but purposeful. He continued his work, but now with a new understanding of his legacy. He kept the journal in the same hidden compartment, a secret only he and the lighthouse would ever know. And when he checked the gears of the light, he no longer saw just a machine. He saw his father's legacy, the secret heartbeat of the Blackwood Point, forever keeping watch over the wild and mysterious sea. Asterisk, the town that lost its colors. The town of Oakhaven was famous for one thing, its colors. Every house was painted a different, brilliant shade. The bakery was a warm goldenrod, the bookstore a deep indigo, and the mayor's house a cheerful sky blue. The gardens were a riot of fuchsia, tangerine, and emerald. Tourists came from miles away just to see the vibrant streets, a living painting under the sun. But then, one morning, the colors began to fade. It started with the town's fountain in the square. The brilliant turquoise tiles turned a dull, lifeless gray. Panic stirred among the townspeople, but they told themselves it was a fluke, a trick of the light. The mayor, a man named Sterling, called in painters to fix it. They used the brightest turquoise paint they could find, but as soon as it dried, it faded back to gray. The next day, the colors of the town hall's doors faded from crimson to a dusty rose. The day after that, the bright yellow of the schoolhouse turned to a pale, sickly cream. Within a week. The entire town was a sad palette of grays, beiges, and off. The vibrant life seemed to drain from Oakhaven, leaving it a ghost of its former self. The townsfolk were distraught. The laughter in the streets quieted. The once lively conversations became whispers. Nobody knew what was happening. Scientists and artists came to study the strange phenomenon, but they found no cause. The paint was chemically sound, the light from the sun was normal, and the soil was healthy. The colors simply refused to stay. Mayor Sterling, once a man of a boundless cheer, became withdrawn. He spent his days staring out his office window at the colorless streets, a deep sadness etched on his face. He remembered Oakhaven in all its glory, and the memory was like a constant ache. One afternoon, a young girl named Lily came to see him. She was only 9, with hair the color of straw and eyes as gray as the town itself. She held a small, lumpy clay figure in her hand, unpainted in plain dot. "Mayor Sterling," she said, her voice small but firm. "My grandmother says the colors didn't disappear, she says. We gave them away." Sterling looked at her, confused. "What do you mean, Lily?" "She said that when the colors started to go, people started to fight. The baker got mad at the florist for selling bread. The librarian complained that the carpenter's loud hammer disturbed his books. My dad got mad at our neighbor for his car too close to our house. The arguing started on the day the fountain turned gray." Sterling's mind flashed back. It was true. A small argument over a misplaced order had started between the grocer and the cafe owner. The next day, a disagreement over property lines had broken out. Then another and another. The town had become a place of small, bitter conflicts. Everyone was so focused on their own problems that they stopped talking to one another. "And my grandmother said," Lily continued, "that the colors were a reflection of our hearts. When we had happy, bright hearts, the town was colorful. But when we filled our hearts with anger and hurt, they turned gray, and so did the town." Sterling looked at the little girl, at her innocent, unwavering conviction. He saw the simple truth in her words. The town hadn't lost its colors, it had lost its harmony. The arguments and resentments had slowly drained the joy from their lives, and the town itself had reflected that sadness. "What do we do now?" Sterling asked, his voice filled with a desperate hope. Lily smiled. "We put the colors back. We put the kindness back." That evening, Mayor Sterling called for a town meeting. The people gathered in the colorless square, their faces ashen in the dim light. Sterling stood on the podium and, in a voice that was uncharacteristically gentle, he told them a story. He told them about Lily and her grandmother's words. He told them that the town's colors were not just paint, but a symbol of their unity and kindness. "We have been so busy fighting with each other," he said, "that we forgot what made us special. We lost our community, we lost our joy. And in doing so, we lost our colors." He then did something no one expected. He walked over to the grocer and the cafe owner, who hadn't spoken in weeks. He took a hand from each and put them together. "Please," he said, "forgive each other, for the sake of our town." Hesitantly, the two men looked at each other, and after a long moment, a small, genuine smile appeared on the cafe owner's face. The grocer's shoulders relaxed, and he nodded. "Okay," he said. As they shook hands, a miracle happened. The doors of the town hall, which had been a sad, faded rose, suddenly bloomed back into a vibrant, glorious crimson. A gasp went through the crowd. Inspired, an elderly woman walked up to her neighbor, with whom she had argued over a noisy dog, and hugged her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. The neighbor's faded blue house turned a bright, stunning sky blue. The people of Oakhaven finally understood. They began to apologize to one another, to offer help, to share stories. A child offered his friend a piece of candy. The librarian helped the carpenter fix a loose cabinet. With every act of kindness, with every word of forgiveness, a new color appeared. A mother and son made up after a long silence, and the bakery's walls glowed with a warm goldenrod. A group of teenagers who had been spreading gossip admitted their mistake, and the bookstore turned a deep, magical indigo dot. By the end of the night, the entire town was filled with color again. Oakhaven was not just restored. It was brighter and more beautiful than ever. The colors felt more real, more alive, because the people had put them back with their own hands and their own hearts. From that day on, whenever a house started to look a little dull, or a splash of paint seemed to fade, the people of Oakhaven knew what to do. They didn't grab a brush. They grabbed a hand. They offered a kind word. They mended a broken friendship. They knew that the true colors of their town were not on the walls of their houses, but in the kindness they held for one another. Asterisk, the last postman of Whispering Pines. Arthur Penny was the last postman of Whispering Pines, a small, sleepy town, nestled deep in a forest that locals swore was enchanted. The town was so old, so isolated, that modern technology had passed it by. There was no internet, no cell service, and only one landline in the mayor's office. For the people of Whispering Pines, the postman was their only connection to the outside world. Arthur was a man of quiet habits. Every morning he'd rise before the sun, strap his leather satchel over his shoulder, and mount his old creaky bicycle to Glimmer. He knew every path, every shortcut, and every family story. He didn't just deliver letters, he delivered news, gossip, and comfort. He'd stop to share a cup of tea with Mrs. Gable, a widow who loved hearing about the mayor's latest gardening project. He'd read letters from faraway grandchildren to old Mr. Henderson, whose eyes were too weak to read the small print. He was the heart of the town one crisp autumn morning. As the leaves turned to gold and scarlet, Arthur's route took him deeper into the forest than usual. The last house on his route, the one he visited only once a month, belonged to a recluse named Elias. Elias lived in a small moss-covered cottage with no windows, and he never spoke, only gave Arthur a silent nod and took his mail. Today, however, there was something new in Arthur's satchel for Elias, a single, thin envelope, with no stamp or return address, just Elias's name written in a delicate, unfamiliar script. Arthur found Elias sitting on his porch, staring into the woods. He looked older than usual, his face etched with a strange sadness. Arthur handed him the mysterious letter. Elias's hands, which were usually steady, trembled as he took it. He didn't open it, but held it close, like a precious, fragile bird. As Arthur turned to leave, Elias spoke for the first time in years. "Thank you, Arthur," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "I've been waiting for this for a long, long time." A week passed and Arthur was on his regular route. The townsfolk were buzzing about the strange weather. A low, constant hum filled the air, a sound so subtle you could mistake it for the wind, but it was always there, day and night. The animals were acting strangely too. Birds flew in odd, chaotic patterns, and the forest creatures seemed to have vanished. On Friday, Arthur got a message from the town mayor. "Arthur," the mayor said, his voice crackling on the old landline. "Elias's mail has stopped coming. Can you check on him? He hasn't been to town in a week." Arthur mounted his bicycle and rode toward Elias's cottage, a sense of unease growing in his stomach. The woods felt different. The light filtering through the canopy was dim, and the air was still and heavy. The humming sound was louder here, a deep thrumming that seemed to vibrate in his chest when he reached the cottage. The door was slightly ajar. Arthur called out, "Elias, are you home?" There was no answer, only a deeper hum coming from inside the house. With a trembling hand, Arthur pushed the door open. The cottage was empty. Dust motes danced in a shaft of light, but there was no sign of Elias. On the table, he saw something that made his heart leap. It was a single silver key, and next to it a note, in the same delicate script as the letter he had delivered. "The hum is the melody of my escape. The key unlocks what was hidden. Now the forest will find its voice again." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. He picked up the key. It was cold to the touch and hummed with a faint vibration. He looked around, the small cottage, his eyes searching what was hidden. He saw nothing but old furniture and a bare floor. He was about to leave when he saw it. A small, intricately carved wooden box on a shelf high above the fireplace. A box that hadn't been there a week ago. He used a stool to reach it. The box was made of a dark wood with beautiful, swirling carvings of trees and leaves. There was no lock, but a small keyhole. Arthur's hand shook as he inserted the silver key. With a soft click, the lid popped open. Inside the box was not empty. It was filled with what looked like tiny, glowing musical notes like fireflies made of light. They pulsed and shimmered with a soft, gentle rhythm, and as the lid opened, the low, constant hum outside the cottage changed. It rose in pitch, becoming a beautiful, harmonious chorus of whispers, rustling leaves, and soft, humming melodies. Arthur stepped outside, holding the box. The forest was different. It was alive with sound. He heard the trees singing, their leaves rustling a gentle song. The wind whistled a beautiful tune through the branches, and even the creek seemed to gurgle with a clear, happy melody. He realized that the hum he had been hearing wasn't a sound of distress. It was a sound of expectation, of waiting. And now, with the box open, the forest was finally singing. He looked back at the cottage. As he watched, the small home began to slowly fade, its mossy walls and wooden porch dissolving into the very light and air. The house was gone. Only a faint outline remained on the ground, and in its place, a small, beautiful sapling with leaves that glowed with the same light as the musical notes. Arthur understood then. Elias hadn't been a recluse. He had been a guardian. He was the one who kept the forest quiet, who kept its magic hidden from the modern world. The humming had been the sound of the forest trying to break free. And the mysterious letter he delivered was Elias's permission for the magic to return. The last postman had delivered the last message to the last guardian, and in doing so, had released the forest's soul. He put the box back in his satchel, but he didn't close it. He rode back to town, and as he did, the forest around him was a symphony of living sound. He delivered the last of his mail with a new purpose. He wasn't just a postman anymore. He was the bridge between the old world and the new, the human who had helped the magical forest find its voice again. And as he handed a letter to Mrs. Gable, she smiled. "Arthur," she said, "do you hear that? The forest sounds so alive today." The boy who collected Ecos Leo lived in a small cottage at the edge of the Whispering Gorge, a place where the wind always seemed to carry voices. But these weren't just any voices, they were echoes. Not the kind that bounce off canyon walls, but echoes of feelings, of moments, of words once spoken and now forgotten. Leo was 12 and had the rare gift or curse, as some saw it, of hearing these echoes. To him, a simple hello wasn't just a word. It was a ghost of every hello ever said in that spot. He heard the joyous greetings of old friends, the shy hellos of first dates, and the hopeful hellos of travelers passing by. The echoes were most powerful in the gorge. They filled the air like hummingbirds, zipping past him with snippets of emotion. He could hear a father's proud laugh, a lover's whispered promise, and the silent, heavy sigh of a person standing at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the vastness. His grandmother, a wise old woman with a gentle face, was the only one who understood his gift. She taught him to be a collector, not just a listener. He built a small box out of pine wood and lined it with soft moss. Whenever he found an echo that was pure and beautiful, he'd capture it in the box. He had echoes of kindness, of bravery, and of true, simple happiness. One day, a businessman from the city came to Whispering Gorge. His name was Mr. Finch, and he planned to build a luxury resort right over the most powerful echo point. Mr. Finch was a loud man, a man of numbers and contract. He talked about progress and development and making a profit. His words were like heavy stones, drowning out the delicate echoes Leo cherished. "It's a perfect location." Mr. Finch boomed to the construction crew, his voice a harsh, grating sound that seemed to chase the echoes away. "A great view, fresh air, just what the city folks want." Leo felt a deep sadness. He knew that once the machine started digging, the old echoes would be destroyed. The stories of the gorge, the laughter, the tears, the whispered hopes would be gone forever. He tried to talk to Mr. Finch, to explain his gift, but the man just patted his head and said, "Son, what you hear is just the wind. You need to focus on things that are real." But for Leo, the echoes were the most real things in the world. He knew he had to do something. That night, under the pale moonlight, Leo went to the gorge with his grandmother. He opened his small box of echoes. "We need to show him what he is about to destroy," he whispered. His grandmother nodded. "But how, my child? He can't hear them." "He doesn't have to," Leo replied. "He just has to feel them." The next morning, Mr. Finch stood at the edge of the gorge with his investors, ready to sign the final papers. He was confident, and his face was set in a smile of triumph. Leo stood a little way off, clutching his box. He took a deep breath, and with all his might, he focused on the most powerful, most beautiful echoes he had ever collected. He thought of the echo of a mother singing a lullaby, full of deep, unconditional love. He thought of the echo of a boy and his grandfather sharing a secret, filled with pure trust. He thought of the echo of two old friends laughing so hard they cried, a sound of perfect, unburdened joy. He didn't just hear these echoes, he felt their warmth, their light, their deep-seated power. He focused all his energy on pushing them out of his box, into the air, into the heart of the man who could not hear them. At first, nothing happened. Mr. Finch was busy talking, pointing to blueprints and explaining profit margins. But then, as Leo poured more and more energy into his task, something shifted. Mr. Finch's booming voice faltered. His hand, which was holding the pen, trembled slightly. A confused look crossed his face. He looked at his investors, but they were still talking. He looked at the gorge, and for the first time he saw not just a piece of land to be exploited, but something more. He felt a strange warmth spread through his chest, a feeling of love so strong it was almost painful. It was followed by a wave of pure joy, so intense it made his eyes water. Then came a deep sense of peace, a feeling of being completely safe, and at home. Mr. Finch dropped his pen. He clutched his chest, and his eyes, which were once so hard and focused on money, looked soft and confused. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew he was feeling something real, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt the weight of all the little moments, the quiet feelings that made life worth living. He turned to his investors, his voice now a mere whisper. I can't do this. I can't build here." The investors were furious. What are you talking about?" they demanded. "This place," Mr. Finch said, his voice full of a sudden, deep respect. "This place it's sacred. It's full of something beautiful, something precious." He didn't know how to explain it. He just knew he couldn't destroy it. Leo watched from a distance, a small, proud smile on his face. He didn't know if his gift had made the man hear the echoes, but he knew it had made him feel them. Mr. Finch left the gorge that day, his blueprints rolled up under his arm. He never returned. The gorge was safe. And from that day on, Leo collected new echoes, the echo of a boy's bravery, a grandmother's wisdom, and a businessman's change of heart. And when he'd lie awake at night, he could hear them all humming softly, in his little wooden box, a symphony of all the good things in the world. The Library of Lost Letters. Amelia was a librarian in a town so small it didn't even have a name on the map. Her library was old, with high ceilings and the comforting smell of paper and dust. But this was no ordinary library. It was the Library of Lost Letters, a place where mail that had been lost, never delivered, never opened found a final resting place. Each day, crates of undeliverable letters arrived from the main post office, letters with smudged addresses, faded stamps, or no recipient at all. Amelia's job was to sort them, catalog them, and shelve them. The shelves were filled with letters from every era, letters from soldiers in forgotten wars, postcards from distant lands, and birthday cards sent to people who had long since moved away. Amelia found solace in these letters. She never read them, of course. Her job was to honor their secrets, but she would often hold them, feeling the weight of the stories they carried. Each letter was a small time capsule of a moment, a memory frozen in an envelope. One gray morning, as a cold rain pattered against the library windows, a particularly old crate arrived. It was made of dark wood and bound with rope that felt ancient. Inside she found a single, thick, yellowed envelope. The handwriting on the front was elegant and old-fashioned, and the address was simply, "To the sea, at the edge of the world." There was no sender's name. Amelia felt a strange pull toward this letter. It was unlike any she had ever seen. Its destination was impossible, yet its intent felt so urgent. She carefully catalogued it and placed it on a special shelf in the very back of the library, a section reserved for the most mysterious letters. A few days later, a new letter arrived. This one was in a modern, brightly colored envelope, and its address was written in a child's messy scrawl to the stars. "For my grandmother." It was a drawing of a smiling star with a small, folded piece of paper inside. Amelia felt a lump in her throat. She placed it next to the letter addressed to the sea. Over the next few weeks, more letters like this began to appear. A letter to a brave hero, a letter to the one that got away, a letter to a new beginning. They were all letters with impossible destinations, filled with hopes, regrets, and unspoken words. The special shelf in the back of the library began to fill up. It was as if the universe, having seen one impossible letter, decided to send all the others it had been holding on to. Amelia felt a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just a keeper of lost mail. She was a keeper of lost feelings. These letters were not meant to be read, but simply to be held and acknowledged. They were monuments to human emotion. But one evening, after the library had closed, Amelia heard a faint sound coming from the back shelf. It was a soft, gentle rustling, like the sound of paper being shuffled by a silent wind. She walked to the shelf and saw the envelopes were glowing with a soft, ethereal light. The letter to the sea was glowing the brightest. The writing on it seemed to shimmer and pulse. She touched the letter, and a vision filled her mind. She saw a young sailor on a ship during a storm, writing the letter. He was saying goodbye to a love he would never see again, a love as vast and unknown as the sea itself. She felt his profound sadness, his deep love, and his quiet resignation. The feeling was so intense, it took her breath away. She then touched the child's letter to the stars. She felt a child's simple, pure love for a grandmother who had passed away, a love that was so big it could reach all the way to the heavens. Amelia realized what was happening. The letters weren't glowing, they were sharing their stories with her. The library wasn't just a graveyard for lost mail. It was a sanctuary where the essence of each letter was preserved. And now, for some reason, they were choosing to share their secrets with her. She spent the rest of the night touching each letter, feeling the weight of the stories that were finally finding a listener. She felt the hope of a traveler, the regret of a broken promise, the joy of a newborn's first cry. She felt a profound sense of connection to all these strangers, these lonely souls who had poured their hearts onto paper. The next morning, the glowing had stopped. The letters were just paper again, silent and still, but Amelia was different. She looked at the world with new eyes. She saw the lost smiles in people's faces, the unspoken words in their silence. She saw that everyone carried a lost letter within them, a message they could never send. From that day on, she made the library of lost letters a place of solace for the people in her town. She would invite people in and without a word would simply stand with them in the quiet, dusty aisles. She wouldn't tell them about her gift, but she would listen. She would listen to the words they didn't have a way to send, the hopes they had lost, and the goodbyes they never got to say. And in that quiet space, among the lost letters, they felt seen, heard, and understood. Amelia continued to be the keeper of the library of lost letters, but her job had changed. She was no longer just a librarian. She was a guardian of human hearts. The toy maker's last creation. In the small, grey town of Silverton lived a toy maker named Silas. He wasn't a young man. His hands were gnarled, and his eyes, though sharp, were surrounded by a web of wrinkles. Silas crafted toys from wood, each one a masterpiece of intricate design. His shop, a cozy nook filled with the scent of sawdust and beeswax, was a place of wonder. But for Silas, the wonder had faded. Modern children wanted screens and flashing lights. His hand-carved rocking horses and spinning tops sat on the shelves, gathering dust. The laughter of children, once the lifeblood of his craft, no longer echoed in his shop. He felt his purpose slipping away, like sawdust through his fingers. One cold, quiet evening, a little girl with bright, curious eyes came into his shop. She didn't look at the shelves of forgotten toys. Instead, she walked to a corner where a single block of gnarled, dark wood sat on a workbench. It was a strange piece of wood, twisted and full of knots, a piece most people would throw away. "What will you make from this, Mr. Silas?" she asked, her voice soft. Silas sighed. "I don't know, little one. This wood ... It's difficult. It doesn't want to be anything, it has no song." The little girl smiled. "Then maybe you shouldn't make it into a toy. Maybe you should make it into what it already is." Silas was puzzled, but the girl's words stuck with him. He spent the next few days just staring at the wood. He began to see the knots not as flaws, but as secrets. The twists weren't imperfections. They were the story of the tree's life. He picked up his tools, not with a plan, but with a feeling. He didn't carve a horse or a soldier. He let his tools follow the grain of the wood, revealing its natural shape. He carved around the knots, smoothing the curves and coaxing out the hidden form. Days turned into nights, and Silas felt a passion he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't building a toy. He was freeing a sculpture. He carved a face into the largest knot, a face that was both sad and wise. He made its arms from the twisted branches, its body from the thickest part of the trunk. He used tiny pieces of glowing amber for eyes and polished the wood until it felt warm and alive under his touch. When he was done, he stepped back and looked at his creation. It was not a toy. It was a small wooden figure, sitting with its head tilted slightly, as if listening to something far away. It was full of flaws, full of bumps and imperfections, but it was the most beautiful thing he had ever made. He didn't give it a name, he just called it the listener. He put the listener on the windowsill where it sat watching the street. Days turned into weeks, and the listener just sat there, quiet and still. One afternoon, a young man, a tourist, stopped in front of the shop. He had been arguing on his phone, his face tight with anger. He looked up, and his eyes landed on the listener. He stopped his call, his anger melting away into confusion. The wooden figure seemed to be looking right at him, its amber eyes holding a deep, ancient wisdom. The man walked into the shop, speechless. "I don't know what it is," he said, "but it just seems to understand. It feels like it's listening to everything and it's telling me to be quiet." Silas smiled. "It is a listener. I made it to listen." The man bought the listener and put it on his desk at home. He found that when he was angry or stressed, he would just look at it, and the wooden figure's calm, silent presence would soothe him. The listener became famous. People came from all over to see Silas's shop, not for the toys, but for his last creation. They didn't buy the listener. Right, was the only one he ever made, but they bought other things, small, beautifully crafted pieces of art that Silas had never thought to sell. His shop became a haven for people who needed a moment of peace. One day, the little girl from the beginning came back. She looked at Silas, her eyes full of wisdom beyond her years. "You didn't give the wood a song," she said. "You gave it a silence, and that's what people needed most." Silas looked at his hands, no longer seeing them as old and tired, but as wise and full of purpose. He had spent his life trying to make things that brought noise and laughter, only to find that his most important creation was a silent one. He no longer made toys. He made listeners, each one a unique piece of wood with its own story, its own knots and imperfections. And in doing so, he found his own purpose, and brought a quiet, beautiful magic back into a loud, busy world. The boy who walked on glass. Leo lived in a city made of glass, not just windows and buildings, but sidewalks, roads, and even parks were crafted from a special, unbreakable glass that shimmered and glowed with a faint, internal light. It was a beautiful place, a city of light and reflection, but it was also a city of silence. The glass city, called Lumina, was built after the Great Silence, a time when a great illness had taken away people's voices. The city founders had believed that if the world was beautiful and quiet, people would find a new way to communicate, and they had everyone communicated through hand gestures, a complex and graceful form of sign language. The city was a ballet of silent movements and expressions. Leo, however, was born with a strange ability. He could hear sounds. Not like a normal person hears a bird or a car. He could hear the sounds of things that had no sound. He could hear the low, sad hum of a broken lamp and the cheerful, high-pitched song of a blooming flower. He could hear the quiet despair of a piece of forgotten metal. But most of all, he could hear the glass. The glass of Lumina sang a constant, beautiful melody. He could hear the cold, crisp notes of the glass skyscrapers and the warm, gentle chords of the glass park benches. He could hear the sharp, clear ring of a sidewalk when someone walked on it. It was a symphony of light and sound, but he was the only one who could hear it. His parents, who communicated with silent, loving gestures, worried about him. He would often stop in the middle of a street, captivated by a sound only he could hear. The other children saw him as strange. The boy who would sometimes laugh at nothing or stand with his head tilted, listening to the ground. They couldn't understand the joyful music of a child running on a glass bridge, or the mournful cry of a shattered glass statue. One day a terrible tremor shook Lumina. A massive section of the glass park cracked the lines of light inside the glass, fracturing into a chaotic, unsettling pattern. The people of Lumina were horrified. A crack in the glass was an unheard of disaster. It was a symbol of imperfection, of something that couldn't be fixed. The crack, to Leo, was not just a sight, it was a sound. It was a deep, mournful wail, a sound of profound pain that echoed through his bones. The city elders decided they had to get rid of the cracked section of the park. They planned to melt it down and replace it with a new, flawless piece of glass. They believed that by removing the crack, they would remove the city's shame. But the wail of the cracked glass grew louder, more desperate, and Leo couldn't bear it. That evening, Leo went to the park alone. He walked carefully, his ears filled with the desperate crying sound of the broken glass. He knelt beside the crack and placed his hand on the cold surface. He didn't just feel the vibration. He heard the story of the glass. He heard the sudden, sharp shock of the tremor, the fear of the people who had been in the park, the pain of the beautiful, perfect material as it broke. He didn't want to fix the glass. He just wanted to comfort it. He leaned close and began to hum, a low, quiet tune that was the opposite of the glass's wail. He hummed a song of acceptance, of quiet beauty and imperfection. He hummed a song of stillness and peace. As he hummed, he felt a strange thing. The wail of the glass didn't go away, but it changed. It became softer, less desperate. The painful sound began to harmonize with his humming, turning into a beautiful, melancholic song. The light inside the cracked glass, which had been flickering wildly, settled into a soft, gentle glow. He spent the whole night there, humming to the cracked glass. In the morning, when the city elders and workers arrived, they stopped and stared. The cracked section of the park, which had been so ugly and jarring, now held a strange, beautiful light. The chaotic lines of the crack pulsed with a soft, peaceful rhythm. It was a flaw, yes, but it was also beautiful. It was a monument to what the city had survived. The elders looked at Leo, then at the glass. They couldn't hear the song, but they could see the beauty. They decided not to replace the glass. Instead, they left the cracked section as a monument to the city's endurance, a reminder that even broken things could hold a special kind of beauty. From that day on, the people of Lumina looked at Leo differently. They didn't understand his gift, but they respected it. He had shown them that a broken thing wasn't always a bad thing. He had taught them that even the silent, cold city of glass had a voice and a story to tell, and sometimes all it needed was a boy who could hear its song. Asterisk, the town of unfinished dreams, the town of Everwood, was a place where people's dreams settled, but never came true. It was a beautiful, melancholic place with houses that were half-built, and gardens that were never finished. The town square had a fountain with no water, and the clock tower had a face but no hands. People came to Everwood with great ambitions, and artists would arrive, full of ideas for a grand painting, but would only finish the background. A musician would come with a brilliant symphony in mind, but would only write the first few notes. No one knew why. It was just the way of Everwood. People would work on their projects with passion. Then, one day, they would simply stop, their motivation draining away like sand through an hourglass. They would live out their lives in a peaceful, quiet sadness, surrounded by the ghosts of their unfulfilled ambitions. A young man named Silas, however, was different. He came to Everwood not to create, but to find. He was a collector of stories, a quiet observer with a notebook full of questions. He was the only one who seemed to notice the silent sorrow that hung over the town. The unfinished projects were not just physical things to him, they were broken hearts. Silas found a room in a half-built house, with walls that ended in bare wood and a roof that was missing a final row of shingles. He spent his days sitting in the half-finished garden listening to the townsfolk talk. He spoke to an old woman who had tried to build a magnificent birdhouse. "I had the most beautiful plan," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "A home for all the birds in the forest. But one day, I just couldn't pick up the hammer. The passion just left." He spoke to a baker who had a half-baked loaf of bread, sitting on his shelf, forever golden brown on one side and raw on the other. "It was going to be the perfect recipe," the baker said, a tear rolling down his cheek. "But I just couldn't finish it." Silas listened, his heart aching with their stories. He realized that the curse of Everwood wasn't a lack of talent or will. It was a lack of a final simple spark. One evening, Silas was sitting in his incomplete house, the cold wind blowing through the open roof. He was tired and frustrated. The stories of the town were beautiful and heartbreaking, but he had no way to help. He had collected the pieces of a puzzle, but he couldn't put it together. Just then, an old man walked by. He was a retired carpenter, and he saw Silas's house. He stopped and stared at the unfinished walls. "I remember the day the owner started building this," the old man said, his voice raspy with age. "He had such grand plans. It was going to be the most beautiful house in town." Silas sighed, but he never finished it. "No," the old man said, "he didn't." He paused, looking at the wood, at the bare spaces where the shingles should have been. Without another word, he walked over to a pile of scrapwood. He picked up a hammer and a few nails, and with slow, deliberate movements, he hammered in one shingle, then another, then another. He worked in the quiet, fading light until the last shingle was in place. The roof was complete. The old man didn't say anything to Silas. He simply looked up at his work, a small, weary smile on his face, and walked away. Silas was stunned. He stood in the warm, enclosed space of his house, a feeling of wonder washing over him. The house was finished. Just one small act, one final push from the stranger, and it was complete. The next morning, Silas went to the birdhouse woman's yard. He saw her incomplete birdhouse, and, remembering the old man's simple kindness, he picked up a small brush and painted one side of the birdhouse with a vibrant red paint. He didn't paint the whole thing. He just painted one side, and then he left. A few hours later. He saw the old woman in her yard. She was staring at the red side of the birdhouse, her face full of shock. She picked up her own paintbrush, which had been gathering dust for years, and with a trembling hand, she began to paint the rest of the house. The next day, the most magnificent, brightly painted birdhouse in all of Everwood stood in her yard. Silas went to the baker shop. He took the half-baked loaf of bread and, with permission, placed it in the oven for a few more minutes. The baker was watching, a defeated look on his face. But as the bread came out, perfectly baked, a new light entered his eyes. He took the loaf, held it close, and began to bake another. This time he didn't stop, he finished it. Silas had found the secret of Everwood. The people hadn't lost their dreams, they had just lost the will to finish them. They needed a catalyst, a final act of kindness to remind them that completion was possible. Silas never created anything himself. He was the uncreator, the one who helped others finish what they had started. He went from garden to garden, from workshop to workshop, making small, almost unnoticeable changes. He would hammer in the last nail, mix the last color of paint, or write the last word of a poem, and slowly, beautifully, Everwood began to change. The gardens bloomed in their entirety, the paintings were hung on walls, and the clock tower, now with hands, began to tell the time. The fountain in the square began to run with clear, cool water. The people of Everwood never knew who was helping them. They just knew that a quiet magic had come to their town, a magic that didn't create things from nothing, but simply reminded people that the most important part of a journey is the last step. And the town of Everwood, once a graveyard for unfinished dreams, became a monument to the simple, beautiful power of completion. Asterisk, the town of silent bells, the town of Havenwood was known for its quiet. It was a place where people lived in gentle harmony with their surroundings. The streets were paved with moss, the houses were built from whispering wood, and the town's central square had a beautiful old clock tower with a single, magnificent bell. But the bell never rang. The bell had not rung in 100 years. According to legend, it was a special bell, forged from a fallen star, and it had a unique gift. It didn't ring with a sound. It rang with a feeling. When the bell tolled, it would fill the hearts of the people with the purest emotion of the moment. If it rang at a wedding, it would fill everyone with love. If it rang at a funeral, it would fill them with peaceful sorrow. But 100 years ago, a terrible fight had broken out in the town, a fight so full of anger and hatred that the bell, unable to bear the pain, had gone silent. Its bronze surface had turned a dull, lifeless gray, and no matter how hard anyone tried, would not make a sound. The people of Havenwood, having lost their emotional anchor, became afraid of strong feelings. They learned to live in a state of quiet, polite neutrality. No one ever raised their voice. No one ever cried out in joy or grief. They simply existed, afraid that any strong emotion would disturb the delicate peace. A young girl named Lyra was different. She was a painter, and her paintings were full of vibrant, wild colors that the townspeople found unsettling. She painted with a passion that frightened them. They didn't understand her bright reds and deep blues, her swirling greens and passionate yellows. They told her her paintings were too loud. Lyra, however, felt a deep longing for the bell to ring. Again, she had read the old stories and felt a deep sadness that her town lived in such a muted state. She would often sit in the town square, staring up at the silent, gray bell, wishing she could hear its song. One day, a terrible storm hit. Heavenward, a lightning strike hit the old clock tower, splitting its wooden frame and sending a shower of sparks down to the ground. The people watched in a terrified silence. They were not used to such violence, such raw emotion from nature. The wind howled, and the rain came down in sheets, and for a moment it seemed the town was lost. Lyra ran to the town square. She was not afraid. She saw the storm not as an enemy, but as a force of powerful, untamed emotion. She saw the lightning as a flash of pure anger, the rain as tears of sorrow, and the wind as a great, beautiful fury. She wanted to capture it all. She ran back to her studio, grabbed her largest canvas and her brightest paints. She began to paint the storm. She used wild, chaotic strokes of brilliant color. Her hands worked with a feverish intensity. She painted the deep, stormy grays and the shocking, jagged lines of lightning with a furious joy. She poured all her passion, all her emotion, into the painting. She wasn't just painting a storm, she was painting her own heart. When the storm finally passed and the townspeople came out to survey the damage, they saw Lyra's painting. It was a massive, living canvas propped up in the square. It was the most beautiful, most terrifying thing they had ever seen. They saw the storm reflected in the painting, but they also saw Lyra's wild passion, her quiet joy, her deep love for the beauty and chaos. A young man, a quiet farmer, looked at the painting and felt a strange feeling in his chest. It was a feeling of awe so powerful it made his knees weak. An old woman looked at the painting and felt a sudden, deep sense of wonder at the power of nature. People stood in front of the canvas, their faces filled with emotions they hadn't felt in decades. And then, it happened. A single low thrum echoed through the town. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated awe and wonder. People looked up at the bell tower and they saw a single clear crack running down. The gray surface of the bell, from the crack a thin silver light was pouring out, and the light carried the feeling. The bell had rung. It had felt the pure emotion of the town and had cracked in order to share it. The people of Havenwood felt the wonder and awe, and for the first time in 100 years, they cried. They cried with a joy so intense it was almost unbearable. They had not just seen a painting, they had felt their own hearts come back to life. Lyra's painting, filled with a beautiful raw emotion, had been enough to stir the hearts of the people of Havenwood, and in doing so, it had woken the town's soul. From that day on, the people of Havenwood learned not to fear emotion, but to cherish it. The bell never rang with sound again, but whenever the people felt a pure, true emotion, a new crack would appear on its surface, and a new, beautiful light would shine out, filling the town with the feeling of the moment. And the town of Havenwood, once known for its quiet, became known for its vibrant, beautiful feelings. Asterisk, the town that traded memories. The town of Hollow's End was a peculiar place. It was a town where memories were not kept but traded. The people of Hollow's End believed that holding on to too many memories was a burden, a weight that would keep them from moving forward. So, once a year they would gather in the town square for the great memory exchange. An old man named Silas was the town's memory keeper. He sat behind a large oak desk, and people would come to him with their memories, each one a small, glowing orb of light. The person would hand him a memory, perhaps of a first heartbreak or a painful argument, and in return, Silas would give them a new, borrowed memory from the town's vast collection. These memories were kept in glass jars, each one a different color and size, representing the type of memory it held. A jar of bright yellow light for a memory of a perfect sunny day. A jar of soft blue light for a memory of a quiet moment of peace. People would leave the exchange feeling lighter, their old burdens replaced with new, pleasant recollections. A heartbroken young man would walk away with the memory of a child's first laugh, and a grieving widow would find comfort in the memory of a breathtaking sunset. The people of Hollow's End were peaceful and calm, but they were also empty. They had no personal history, no stories of their own. A young woman named Elara, however, was different. She had arrived in Hollow's End from the outside world, and she found the memory exchange terrifying. She believed that memories, both good and bad, were what made a person who they were. She watched as a father traded the memory of his son's birth for the memory of winning a game of chess. The father seemed happy, but to Elara he looked like a ghost. Elara had a secret. She couldn't trade her memories. They were too deeply a part of her. She held on to her memories of a childhood spent in a vibrant, loud city, of the joy and the pain of growing up, of the love and the loss. Her mind was a chaotic, beautiful landscape of a life lived. The people of Hollow's End saw her as strange. She carried the weight of her past with her, and they didn't understand why she would choose to live that way. One night a terrible storm hit the town. The wind howled and the rain poured down. But the storm was not just in the sky. It was a storm of memories. The shelves in Silas's office rattled, and the jars began to crack. The memories, once neatly contained, began to leak out, swirling through the air in a chaotic mess of light and color. Memories of loss and joy, of anger and peace, mixed and swirled, and the townspeople began to feel them all at once. A man who had traded the memory of his first day of school suddenly felt the terror of being lost in a crowd. A woman who had traded the memory of a painful breakup suddenly felt the crushing weight of that moment. They were not their own memories, but they were real, and they were overwhelming. The people of Hollow's End began to cry out in confusion and fear. They had no context for these feelings, no personal story to connect them to. They were drowning in a sea of emotions that were not their own. Alara ran to Silas's office. He was sitting in the middle of the room, surrounded by a maelstrom of memories, his face a mask of despair. The memories were a part of him, a part of his town, and they were tearing themselves apart. Alara knelt beside him and gently took his hands. "Silas," she said, "you can't fix this with another memory. You have to face them." Silas just shook his head. "I don't know how," he whispered. "I've been burying feelings for so long, I don't know how to live with them." "You don't have to live with a million memories," Alara said. "You just have to live with your own." She then did something no one in Hollow's End had ever done. She shared a memory. She closed her eyes and, with all her will, she pulled a memory. From her mind, a memory of her mother teaching her to bake a cake. A memory filled with the warmth of the oven and the sweet smell of vanilla. She held the memory in her hands, a small glowing orb of pure love and comfort, and she placed it in Silas's hands. Silas took the memory, and a feeling of profound warmth spread through him. It was a feeling he had never known. The memory was not his, but the feeling was real. He felt a quiet love and a deep peace, and in that moment, the storm of memories in the room began to quiet. They weren't fighting anymore. They were settling, as if they had found a place to rest. From that day on, Silas and Alara began to change the town. They didn't trade memories anymore. They taught people to keep their own. It was a difficult process. The townspeople were scared, at first, but Alara would sit with them, and she would tell them her stories. She would tell them about the sadness of loss, the joy of a good laugh, and the beauty of all the small, unimportant moments that made up a life. Slowly, the people of Hollow's End began to embrace their own pasts. They started to remember their own lives, to cherish their own pains and their own joys. The town, once so quiet and empty, began to fill with laughter and sorrow, with arguments and apologies, with all the chaotic, beautiful emotions of life. And the memories, once trapped in glass jars, were now alive in the minds and hearts of the people who owned them.